Special Counsel Bob Mueller's investigation could soon be getting a lot more interesting after we learned today the longtime Trump attorney, friend, and so-called fixer Michael Cohen could be willing to make a deal with prosecutors. He told ABC's George Stephanopoulos, quote, "I put family and country first. I will not be a punching bag as part of anyone's defense strategy. I am not a villain in any story and won't allow others to try and depict me in that way." Many are interpreting that family and country first comment to mean he won't be putting Trump first, but only time will tell. And speaking of time, we're now just a week away from the president's announcement of a second Supreme Court nominee, choice that could shape the court for a generation to come on issues like gay rights, abortion, possibly even deadly force by police officers, a standard the High Court has ruled on in the past. Over the weekend, a rally was held in Pittsburgh after the police killing of unarmed 17-year-old Antoine Rose, which was caught on camera by a bystander. That officer was charged with criminal homicide and released on bail. And it was a story much like one that happened right here in Boston, which inspired MSNBC host Lawrence O'Donnell's 1983 book, Deadly Force, the true story of how a badge can become a license to kill. It's now out in paperback with an updated preface and afterwards, and is sadly as relevant as ever. Lawrence O'Donnell joins me now. It's great to see you.
Great to be here, Jim.
Before we get to the book, for all those worried about the impact of Trump's second pick, you have, I hope, a plausible path to rejection. Do you believe it's plausible?
Well, the only plausible path is Republican votes. There's absolutely nothing that the Democrats can do procedurally on the Senate floor. I worked on that Senate floor for 7 years, and I can tell you there is no parliamentary trick. A lot of people are throwing around these ideas on Twitter. You can ignore every one of them. You need to get the two Republican pro-choice senators, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. You need to get both of them to vote against this nomination, which is a very hard thing to do. But that's going to require activism and pressure in their states, in Maine and in Alaska. And so Elizabeth Warren and others can talk to the senators Murkowski and Collins in the hall as much as they want to, and that can very rarely have a little bit of an impact. It's the most rare form of impact.
You want Warren to go to Maine and campaign?
Maybe. Maybe. Elizabeth Warren is a real star within the party. She really attracts crowds. But the Democrats, if they're really trying to stop this, are going to have to think beyond the Senate floor because they cannot stop it on the Senate floor.
But what's the end game? Then they just have to cross their fingers and pray that they win a majority in November?
The end game, and this is a very long shot, is that you get Susan Collins to vote against, you get Lisa Murkowski to vote against, and then the three Democrats who are very likely to vote for it, Joe Manchin, Heidi Heitkamp, Joe Donnelly, they're very likely to vote for this nominee. They will be able to pull back.
They voted for Gorsuch.
They voted for Gorsuch, and they'll be able to pull back those three Democratic senators if they have the cover of the two Republican senators.
So what happens when he just nominates another one in 2 months or another one?
You go through it again.
Okay,
you go through it again every day of the Trump presidency. You go through it again.
Let's talk about deadly force. The shooting of an unarmed black man by Boston police 40 years ago. A story, when you read it, that at least in my estimation could have been told in Staten Island or in Pittsburgh. The only obvious difference is your father was involved and there was no video. That's a fair description, is it not?
Yeah, and my father was a former Boston cop who ended up, while he was a cop, full-time, ended up going to Suffolk College and Suffolk Law School nights to become a lawyer. And so he was in a position when Mrs. Bowden, James Bowden's widow, came to him looking for help, to not just help, but to know what to do. And to know how to dig through and cut through a police cover-up, because that's what he had.
Why was he willing to take on the cops, for the institution from which he came?
Two things. He knew right away with the information that he had on it that this was a bad shooting. That's what his gut told him. And he was very much that way. He could look at the tip of the iceberg of evidence and have a gut feeling about a case. And then all of the evidence collected supported what his initial feeling was. But it was more emotional than that. He lost his father when he was 11 years old in really tragic circumstances. And here he had a widow coming into him with a 6-year-old daughter and a 6-month-old son. And the way he said it to me was, I just couldn't let her leave here without a lawyer. In fact, So it was a single mother thing in his own life that he could relate to? Yeah, his mother, he grew up in the same, very close area of Roxbury to where James Bowden grew up. It was a very strong Irish community, and when he was a kid, now it was a black community. At this point, still is, and so he connected to this case on a very emotional level.
And some of the Boston cops decided to send a message to your father through you. Is that correct?
It's the
Can't believe you're laughing, by the way.
Well, I am, because it's kind of for us, it's the kind of the comic relief chapter of the book. It scares other people, but the cops did come. People involved in this shooting did come, and they arrested me, and they beat me up, and they thought this would scare my father off the case. No, it just made it much worse for them, because it just animated him all the more. And we're from Dorchester, and
Dorchester.
That kind of stuff is not shocking to us, and it wasn't the first time I took a punch, and so it doesn't. Believe me, we got over it pretty quick. I spent one night in the hospital. We got over it pretty quickly.
Boston Irish against Boston Irish.
That's what it was. It was a real endless battle. But and this is kind of almost an inexplicable Boston Irish thing. At the end of this story, and at the end of this book, I'm standing there in federal courthouse. And one of these cops involved in the case used to be a baseball coach of mine in Dorchester. That's how close this story is, how small town it is in that way. And at that point, when it's all over legally, he admits to my brother and me in the hallway of the courthouse that of course it was a bad shooting. Everybody knew it was a bad shooting that night. But, what do we care? Is basically what he says at the end of the book. And if I could figure out the difference between, these Dorchester, Irish guys standing over here who think this is an outrage and go on a quest for justice over it, versus these very similar Boston Irish guys standing here in that same moment in the hallway who think, who cares? It's just another guy got killed in a housing project in Roxbury. Who cares? I can't explain how those guys became that different in adulthood, and if I could, we could solve a lot of problems.
So fast forward or slow forward 40 years, at least my estimation is video has not made that much of a difference. Maybe it's raised...
I can teach it either way. Look, there are stories...
it made a difference in Pittsburgh, obviously, but we've seen a lot of black men shot walking away where cops have not been indicted.
But that's going from zero prosecutions for police shooting people in the back of the head when this book was written, versus, okay, now we've got some prosecutions.
Explain what the law was. I was stunned. What was the law?
Prior to my book coming out in '83, it was legal in many states to shoot people in the back, shoot what they called fleeing felony suspects in the back. About a year and a half after my book came out, the Supreme Court ruled that you could no longer pass state laws allowing police officers to shoot people in the back on suspicion.
Do you know, by the way, talk about people not paying attention. This is only a Massachusetts case, but talk about progression in one area. This is the state's highest court made a decision in 2016. The whole notion was if you're fleeing the cops, they can presume that you did something wrong. Listen to this line from the majority decision. The finding that black males in Boston are disproportionately and repeatedly targeted for certain stops suggests a reason for flight totally unrelated to consciousness of guilt. I mean, that is unbelievable.
Yes, and real, though. And very real. And look, in this story, in the story of American police use of deadly force, which is a much older story than people realize. In 1979, I wrote my first published piece, which was an op-ed piece in the New York Times about police use of deadly force. That was the first time in the history of that newspaper that they addressed that subject. First time in its history. And then we went decades of silence about it. And then after Michael Brown, with cable news and the internet and home video that everybody has, the subject has come back to life in a new way.
Michael Brown's what inspired you to do the paperback. You only have 30 seconds left. You admitted on the radio to me and Marjorie Egan today that you not only do the voice for the audio book, but you do different Boston accents for different people?
The book is filled with Boston accents.
Okay, do quick.
quick. There's my old man. I can't.
Come on, too quick.
I'm not an actor. An actor can do it like that.
You did it for the audio book. You're not leaving here. Go ahead, do one.
Give me a page, and I'll
We're almost out of time.
We're out of time. Okay.
Lawrence O'Donnell.
And where had Bowden worked that morning? In the children's building, you saw him. I can't. This isn't going to work.
Get the audio book.
You got to. The audio book was really hard because I had to do a bunch of different Boston accents. Of all the characters have them, and they're all different.
Frightening. Nice to see you, Lawrence O'Donnell. It's a great book. Great to see you. The book again is Deadly Force: A Police Shooting and My Family's Search for the Truth.